Hey guys, let's talk. I feel like I owe you an apology because I didn't realize when I dropped my video the other day about how I used to be this Mormon, ultra-conservative, Trump-loving, trad-wifey, white supremacist girly in the past that people were going to be so shocked about it, and especially my own subscribers, many of whom have been here on this journey where I've been talking about my former life for so long. But something about that video really painted a picture for everyone that was real, not figurative, and that it was much more extreme than anyone realized. So I'm sorry that when I do all of these before and after videos and I tell you, you guys, I lived this way over here, and now I am the woke, liberal, atheist, LGBTQ supporting world activist for women's rights that you see in front of you. But that's a life take too. The life take one was real. It actually happened. And she was a monster. I didn't realize that you guys didn't realize that I meant that literally and not allegorically, figuratively. That is why I do what I do at great cost to myself. And I know I'm not one of these influencers where I'm making tons of money and I wasn't even monetized for the first while. I was just getting the word out so that I could warn other people that this was a problem. You guys have watched my videos on how I was a white supremacist, right? You've watched my videos on how I was Ballerina Farm before Ballerina Farm was even Ballerina Farm. When Hannah Wright Neeleman was like in middle school, I was doing that crap. And I don't think that you realized that I meant that. So now that you're paying attention, here's what I think I need to do today. Today, I'm going to do an unscripted video where we're going to have a little show and tell, and I'm going to bring some receipts. And these are things that I hate to actually share with anyone because I'm very comfortable. I'm going to cry in who I am today. And it's embarrassing in a lot of ways and just uncomfortable to share who I used to be. But we're going to do it. So I'm going to share some photos. I'm going to answer a couple of your comments, and we're going to dive into my life take one, the person that I was before somebody yelled cut on my life. So come along.
Ready on the set? Let's try this again.
I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take Two. Well, everyone, I was non-consensually forced off camera this week after I already had a medical problem going on that had me on antibiotics and decided that the way to feel better Friday morning, which was, I think, predicted to be a 114-degree day here in Arizona where I live, I decided that I needed a light jog/walk past the horses that are way far away from my house. I left about 10 o'clock in the morning and ended up with a heat stroke. The only thing that I really remember from that afternoon is that one of the sexy paramedics had a really glossy mustache that I was staring at as they were determining what was wrong with me before being hauled off to the ER. And heat strokes are scary. I didn't realize that I had one, but I have been mostly in bed for most of the week. And that's where I've been. My voice is weak, but I am recovering, and I just have to stay cool in the Arizona summer. So this is going to be a fun one. So I've been laying in bed this morning, harvesting some old photos from my old Facebook, and I'm going to take you down memory lane with me because I used to be a Trump-loving, really hateful MAGA girl. And first I want to dive into exactly what that person was, who she was, what she thought, and how she viewed the world and others. And then I want to answer 3 questions that I've received from followers on that video about voting for Trump. Before we start, I would love once again to invite you to read my article. I'll link in the description here, and I've removed the paywall so you can read this for free, on how I was indoctrinated into white supremacy as a very young child. And if I was going to estimate exactly how old I was in this article, I think I was about 3 or 4. That's how old I was when I remember my church teaching me that the Navajos, Mexicans, African Americans that lived around me in my community here in Arizona were cursed by God, that they were lesser than me, that they were unrighteous and that I should look down on them. That is when I first had that awareness because of childhood indoctrination. So I'd invite you to read that article because I think that that is foundational to a lot of how I moved throughout the world and a lot of my viewpoint for the 48 years that I spent inside of Mormonism and then 4.5 years of that in Christianity. So welcome to my family photo album. We're going to start with my ex-husband. I married a guy who was from Arkansas, and I met him through some Mormon friends right after I graduated from BYU, Idaho, where I had been radicalized by some of the Idaho kids up there into prepping and end-of-day type of stuff. And that was a big thing in the early 90s, honestly. I graduated from high school in 1992, so I would have graduated from college in 1994. You guys, tell me he's not just old school MAGA. Like before MAGA was MAGA. Like he's the OG. And I love that the caption here says, hot. This is not even like a Halloween costume or something. This is just him. He had been hunting, but then he came home and he was just kind of hanging around the house. And those aren't hunting goggles. Those are the glasses that he wore every single day. Those were just his glasses. They had this orange tint. And people would sometimes ask him, are those your racquetball goggles? And he's like, no, these are just my glasses. And that's just the hat that he wore, whether he was hunting or not. And just the family photo on the wall. This is what I come from. I myself am not from the South. Like I said, I'm an Arizona girly, and I had a lot of Utah, Idaho influence. I spent part of my childhood in Oregon. We had family members from California, and Arizona's always been very much influenced by California. But I was raised in the Mormon bubble. So my influence came from within Mormonism, and I have family members who have read all the same books as Lori Fallow Daybell, and were part of that train, but without unaliving your kids. But when Arizona Girly met this, that certainly influenced me, and not just with country music, but with ideology. So eventually, we would take our Arizona Mormon family to Arkansas, and one of the primary reasons for that move for me was that I had been inspired by Duck Dynasty, and I don't say that tongue-in-cheek. I started watching Duck Dynasty with Jake, and I was like, these people, they are real Americans. They are authentic. They're all about family and hunting and like living off the land. And again, this is before Ballerina Farm came along. So we moved ourselves within an hour or two of, I don't even remember exactly how far. And one of the first things that we did is we took all the kids to Duck Dynasty. It was me and Jake, literally outside of Duck Dynasty. So when we stepped into my homesteading era, where we were actually making money off of influencing in that way before TikTok or anything had ever come along, that was inspired predominantly by them. I remember thinking, I have the hillbilly husband, just like the Duck Dynasty guys, and I started having a little bit of an accent, but I definitely had like the Utah girl vibes. So I envisioned us being like a Duck Dynasty type of influencer. This one is really good. I have the doTERRA shirt. So there's my Utah, right? We were in South Carolina in this picture because we would eventually end up in South Carolina from Arkansas. And I have that Utah girl hairstyle and the spray tan. And I mean, I just look like Mormon. People would ask me in the South, are y'all Mormon? And then people called me California. And I found that really offensive because California is liberal and Arizona was not at the time. So my southern neighbors, that was my nickname. They didn't remember Jenny. A lot of my neighbors just picked that up. Like they would call me, hey, California. And I found that offensive because it didn't represent my values. Anyway, around my neck, you'll see that itty bitty little cross necklace. Mormons don't wear crosses, but I was wearing that so that the Baptists would like keep off my back and know that like Mormons are Christians. I was always telling them, because my Baptist neighbors were always like, y'all going to hell, you're not Christian. And I would tell them Mormons are Christian. I got the cross to prove it. But you'll also notice my Dixie flag pen because there had been a shooting. And so the Dixie flag was under all this controversy. And I wore that thing proudly every single day. I had Dixie flag bumper stickers. I know that when I tell the story, somebody's going to say, this is just another scripted thing. Jenny's saying this for shock value. My life is unbelievable, but it is true. And those two things can go together. we had a neighbor, his name was Ben, in South Carolina, and he mowed our lawn, and he was also a fireman, and he was also part of the Klan. And he talked to my ex-husband about becoming part of the Klan, which my ex-husband was absolutely not inclined to do. In hindsight now, I'm a little bit shocked because, like, why wasn't he? Because it's really reflective of himself, but we saw the Klan as being unchristian. Anyway, during that whole Dixie flag thing, my Klan neighbor brought over this little mini Dixie flag with the South Carolina state flag, which I proudly put in my planter on my own front porch. My front porch, what is this, 2015? Had a Dixie flag next to the South Carolina. Let's talk about gun rights, shall we? I was obsessed with gun rights. I was always voting for gun rights, and like whenever there was a shooting, it's like, well, that's because people aren't going to church and praying. That's not because of the weapons themselves. So here's my husband and my son squirrel hunting. All of our kids tagged out that year on deer. So like Jesus and guns and religion and all that stuff just went hand in hand. Like Jesus wanted us to protect ourselves. That was a God-given right. The United States Constitution was inspired by God. So of course, like guns. Hey, this is me at my son's Eagle Scout. After he got his Eagle Scout, there's like a little pin that they pin on the mommies. And the reason I included this in my former MAGA life is that I think that the Boy Scouts of America is another one of those things that is OG MAGA. Like they're foundational, especially when implemented by Mormons, and especially Mormons in areas of the South and parts of Utah and everything in Idaho and parts of Nevada. In fact, I'm going to throw this one in here. It's not in my lineup, but just recently in Nevada, a Mormon podcaster posted that they had all of their 8 to 11-year-old boys, because the church no longer does Boy Scouts, so the Mormons are still trying to do this stuff. And they had an activity just 2 weeks ago, again, 8 to 11-year-old boys. And I'm going to show you the itinerary here, included terrorist hunting. That's why these little guys are walking around with the airsoft guns. And by the way, I was a Cub committee chair and a Cub mom for many years because of America. Like those old-fashioned values were really important to me. And I felt like the boys in our area needed to have those prepper skills because someday Armageddon was going to happen. Jesus was going to come back, and Scouts was my hope for the future. I included this picture of an actual floor plan of one of my actual homes, which was huge and beautiful and custom designed and custom luxury details everywhere, because the prosperity gospel is a big part of my former life. Like, I actually think that the wealth that we made kept me locked into God, Jesus, America, and prepping in some of those concepts, because I felt like it was God and Jesus and America and prepping and being a mommy and a trad wife and all of those different things that led to the prosperity. It was impossible for me to separate the chicken from the egg and realize, oh no, we're actually making money because we're just hard workers and it's a good market. And sometimes we got lucky. Sometimes we're just really good at what we did. By the way, I didn't make a penny of that. I just worked for room and board because I was a trad wife. So my name wasn't even on the bank accounts. My ex-husband would give me little envelopes of cash, but I did live in $1 million homes and drive luxury vehicles and the most expensive chains. And diamond tennis bracelets and all this stuff. You guys, this is just 6 years ago. This is right after I left the Mormon church and right before this conversion process began. And I call this my Fox News look. And I very much felt like this was my Fox News look. Like I had Fox News on all day, every day. There was my primary influence, and the Book of Mormon, the Bible, and Mormon Church. Speaking of the Mormon Church, I just have to throw in a couple of photos here for my Mormon followers. So this is me and my son in the home of one of the piano guys, because, I mean, that's how linked in we were. My son was performing with the piano guy's wife, Julie. He was an incredible violinist. Music and excellence and refinement and culture, they are just such a hallmark of MAGA, like, especially if it's Christian music. My son was singing a song about Jesus. Can I find that video and black out his face? I might do that as a short. Stay tuned. Follow for that short. And speaking of this beautiful son, here's me picking up my son from his mission. Because if you really believe in the Lord and America, you're going to colonize your religion and your philosophies. And we did that. He went out for 2 years. I feel like this picture of me and my kids is just so trad wifey. Like, this is everything. This is what Ballerina Farm wants us all to be doing. I had 2 kids by the time I was 26. I met my ex-husband at 19, married at 20, and I would have 5 kids, 1 adopted, because, I mean, that's a big thing too. Like, we got to adopt those kids that don't have good parents. By the time I was 36. So 5 by the time I was 36. We only lived in this house until 2003, 2004. So that's about when this era was. And let me just wrap it up with this picture of my whole huge, big Mormon family. My great-grandparents, grandparents. I'm down in front with a little baby doll on my shoulders. I don't know, could have been 5 years old in this photo. And a lot of these people are still active believing Mormons and total preppers right now today in 2025. In fact, one of my cousins and her husband here saved their entire lives just so that they could take that little Visions of Glory book that, isn't that Lori Vallow's book that she was all into? And then they bought land up in Utah. They had just gone up to sink the diesel tanks and start prepping for the millennium the same year that I got divorced. And he had a heart attack really young at like age, I don't know, 55 or something. And he died. So they had sold their home, moved away, moved into civilization to prep for the end, and then he dies. And other people in this photo live off grid because they're waiting for the end to come. They voted for Trump. I wasn't just the only lone wolf in my family. I was born and raised and indoctrinated, and that was my life. That's the end. I just can't take putting up any more pictures for you guys. And it's actually hard, like the emotions of going back to those days and just remembering who I was in the time. So there's the receipts, you guys. I was MAGA to the core. And if you follow me now and you didn't realize that, I'm really sorry. But no, I haven't had a gentle transition into a slightly different life and slightly different viewpoints. When I say life take 2 and it burned to the ground, it did. And the phoenix rising from the ashes was absolutely nothing like the ashes from which the phoenix originally rose. So now let me answer a couple of your questions here. The first one is, what was it that made you change your mind and see the light? And I'm going to ask Spencer tonight on my live stream. So please subscribe and make sure that you're following. I'll post the link for that live stream here as soon as I get done with this video. We're going to be talking about his experience as a Jamaican American within the Mormon Church living in Utah. So I'm going to ask him the same question too. I like to have simple and straightforward. Your question was, so what was it that made me change my mind and see the light? I was raised like this, okay? My whole entire life was fear of outsiders, fear of non-members, fear of sin, fear of Satan. And that was just my everyday life. Even as a little child, I was afraid of kids in my classroom who weren't members of the church. I was afraid that the world was getting evil. I was afraid that Jesus was going to come back and Armageddon was going to be this really hard thing to go through. I was always randomly afraid of going to hell. Like, I yelled at my sister, I might be going to hell. That's kind of a Mormon thing. Like, you're not just saved by Jesus, you have to work your way to heaven. So I was raised with this fear of other people that was very palpable and had its own certain, like, sensory channels to it. And in many ways, that fear-based indoctrination from childhood had wired my nervous system in very specific, very concrete ways. And then a really interesting thing happened. My life got really hard. My now ex-husband got so abusive that I was ordered to see an actual therapist. And that actual therapist taught me actual things. And one of the most life-changing things that my therapist did was he had me tune into how I felt about things. And he would point out, Jenny, you tell me all the time that you feel like shit, that you're afraid of everything, you have anxiety, you eat stress for breakfast, like your big trad wife life and the Mormon church and all this stuff. Like it's not actually resonating with you. And he taught me the word congruity and authenticity. He taught me to self-reflect. And little bit by little bit, he made me start to sit in peace and happiness and to peel back the layers of conflict. And it's funny because he wasn't trying to change my worldview about anything. He was just having me look inward to my own intuition and barometer, and nobody had ever done that before. Remember, I'd been born, raised, indoctrinated that Heavenly Father is watching you and Jesus is watching you and Satan is tempting you and the non-members and the brown-skinned people and all of these people are out to get you and the world is about to collapse because Armageddon and the second coming. And nobody had ever just said, hey, Jenny, breathe and think and feel. And as I started to go through all of this in 2015, 2016, by this I mean sitting down with a professional therapist and learning how to feel and listen, I started filling my diary with all of these entries about I never realized how much fear and anxiety there actually is inside of me. It's like this bottomless pit. And I started to just flip that around and become conscious of it and have an expectation of peace and happiness instead. And I know I've done videos on why I actually left the Mormon church and why I actually left the Christian church and why the marriage failed and why I had these major life transitions. But the very foundation of all of that was that I started to listen internally. And so then my abusive husband would come in the door after a road trip. And I had created this little bubble of peace that my therapist had helped me to curate. And this horrible man would come in and all of a sudden it was like, whoa, I have this little bubble. And that bubble of peace is a boundary that I'm not willing to let anybody cross. So if you're going to come in here and yell at me and tell me that I'm shit and garbage and you don't like the waffles that I cooked and you think that my butt's too big, then you have two choices. Either love me and be kind or stay outside of the bubble, but I'm not going to let you pop that bubble and come inside. And little things like not sitting down to dinner with my kids because it caused so much anxiety. I had so many kids and kids at dinner time, and I had been told by the Mormon church that the family that eats together has like the greatest connection with parents and children. And so that's something that Heavenly Father wants you to do. That's why the Mormon girlies are always cooking so much. Look at how much food that ballerina farm girl puts out all the time. That's a Mormon teaching. That's a Christian value for so many of my Christian friends too. And it was causing me stress. And so my therapist was like, well, your inner voice is telling you, don't sit down at the dinner table with 5 angry kids when dad's on a road trip, and don't sit down with dad when he hates you. Buy yourself a little TV tray, sit in front of your favorite video. The first time you do it, get yourself a lobster tail and maybe like some Martinelli's and your favorite slice of cheesecake and just sit there in that peace. Okay, I don't even have to have the photo album for this one. This is the TV tray that I bought. So I would sit at my couch and I would eat my dinner in peace and quiet, and I started to just feel that happiness and that lack of fear, that lack of conflict. And then I started to notice, like, when I was feeling fear and hatred and anxiety and conflict, and it was in marriage, and it was parenting, and it was trad wife life, and it was church and politics and hateful friends groups. And so one day I walk into the Mormon church, and I believed in the Mormon church, and I was sitting in sacrament meeting, and they were being super sexist. And I felt that fear and that anger and that hatred for other people. And I thought, this isn't the peace that I had sitting down at my little TV tray last night, eating my lobster tail. And then I get to the final hour, which is women's Sunday school. And the women's Sunday school was on the topic of the evils of homosexuality. And it was a bunch of hateful people talking about all of the gay people that they hated. And I had been just very gently sort of introduced to the concept of not hating people. And as I listened to that lesson, I started to feel that fear and that hatred and let's go get the beast type of thing. And I had almost been inoculated to it. And suddenly I was so used to being kind and tolerant and happy and peaceful over in my little bubble that just didn't jive. So I stood up and I walked out of the Mormon church and I've never been back. And that's why. The thing is, when you're successfully radicalized as a child, you think that you're supposed to hate everybody. And I did. Okay, question number 2 that I want to answer is, did your beliefs all change at the same time, or was it a slow process? It's hard to believe that your beliefs on abortion, guns, economy, football went. Nope, it is absolutely a gradual process, and I am still unpeeling all of the layers of the onion today. And I resigned from the Mormon church, left my marriage, and began this process in October of 2018. That was the last day that I ever went to Mormon church. So first, it's just like, oh, the Mormon church isn't true. Joseph Smith isn't a prophet. But when you've been indoctrinated your whole entire life, then who you are is a radical. So for me, I think the word deconstruction has been really meaningful, because if you deconstruct something and then reconstruct with those same pieces, like say you break down a brick wall and then you're going to use those bricks to build something new, you're going to take each brick and you're going to look at each one and make sure, maybe this one's not good anymore, so I'm going to throw it in the pile. And maybe this one's perfect, so I'm going to put it into the new wall. And that's how my life and my worldview has certainly been. So bit by bit, I developed new friends who weren't radicalized MAGA people. And then we'd have conversations about the reservations here in Arizona. And my new friends would realize that I was racist. And so I would get feedback from them. And then I would listen to podcasts and read books and talk to my therapist. And I would take that one little bit, brown skin and what I was taught in Mormonism. And I would really look at that brick and say, is this good? Is this real? Or is this something that I just need to toss in the dumpster? Because no, you don't leave behind all of your ideology all at once. It's usually bit by bit by bit. And then there's so many interwoven, nuanced things that go with that. So then eventually I was like, well, women should be able to work, and women aren't less than men. And I started to deconstruct the patriarchy and kind of lean into feminism. And then I started to deconstruct religion and the Bible and Jesus and all those little individual components. And is there something here that I need to keep, or is it all going in the dump? And again, foundationally, the only reason that I was able to go through this process was that I had been taught to listen to my own gut and intuition and lean into science and research and accredited sources for what are best practices and what causes the least amount of harm. So I had to rediscover, how do I parent? Because with my first batch of kids, it was, don't have sex, don't date until you're 16, and get married as fast as you can and have as many babies as you can, because that's what Heavenly Father and Jesus and the Mormon church want you to do. And my whole entire parenting system was built around that. Well, I came out of my former life, but I hadn't deconstructed my parenting bits yet. And that's been a gradual process that I'm still fine-tuning to this day. All right, and the last question I want to answer is, I truly don't understand how Christian parents teach their children that empathy is weakness. And I will say that I've talked a lot about toxic empathy and how I hate that phrase. And so I've had multiple comments on this topic. It's not that I was taught in the Christian church that empathy is weakness. I was taught to be humble. I was taught to be meek. I was taught to love one another. But I was also taught that I was only supposed to love other Christians. And that if I exhibited empathy, tolerance, and support for instance, a gay friend, I wasn't supposed to be friends with a gay person, or a Catholic friend, or a friend who had his nose pierced and was smoking marijuana, then that became toxic empathy, because I was covering sin with love and I was enabling those people to commit sins. And I guess I viewed that sort of in the way of somebody who is an accomplice in a crime. You know what I mean? Like, if you had a friend who robbed a bank and you drove the getaway car and you hid them so that the police couldn't find them, and then what that does is all of those people at the bank have lost their money and the bank is going to go out of business because you covered this criminal. That's how I viewed anybody that was a sinner in the world. And so toxic empathy comes from that. It's not that empathy itself is toxic, but if you were applying empathy to sinners, well, then you are the problem. And that's where the empathy becomes toxic, because naturally, if somebody has consequences for being the wrong, whatever it is, being a sinner, being less than, being cursed in any way, and they have those consequences, and especially if you are part of giving them those consequences. So when I fought against Prop 8, because I didn't want gay people in California to be able to get married, that to me was toxic empathy. I know that phrase wasn't around yet, but I thought that loving and supporting people who wanted to get married to one another, who were sinning in the eyes of God, that was a terrible thing to do. The more loving, kind thing for me to do was to make sure that that sin was legally prohibited against. And I viewed the phrase love one another as I'm supposed to love one another, like the other people at church. I'm supposed to love other Christians. I'm supposed to love other Mormons. I'm supposed to love other good people who aren't committing sin. But God himself says that, if you're not good, he's going to spew you out of his mouth. And there are so many teachings that I learned throughout my whole entire life that taught me that I was supposed to judge, that I was supposed to exhibit tough love towards the sinners, because that's what the church girlies are supposed to do. That a church girly like me was supposed to exhibit tough love towards the sinners and to show them kindness and compassion. That would be toxic. So that's my best explanation for that phrase, toxic empathy, and what I myself was taught within the church. All right, we've done the slideshow and some Q&As, and I hope that clears some things up for you and helps you see where I came from. Just a reminder, this is very much at this time a viewer-supported channel. So my Venmo is always in the description, and if you can hit that super chat, it's currently still helping to put braces on Brody. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.